In this episode, we talk about why writer Arundhati Roy could soon be prosecuted under the stringent anti-terror law UAPA. We also talk about a private medical college from which not a single batch has graduated in 13 years. But first, we talk about the recent changes that have been made to the NCERT political science textbooks. Hi, I'm Shashank Bhargava, and you're listening to Three Things, the Indian Express news show. Since 2014, the NCERT, the apex body in charge of drafting school textbooks used by more than 4 crore students annually, has been revising and updating its course material. And as part of its 4th round of revisions, it has made changes to the textbooks of 3 subjects: history, sociology, and political science. These have included changes to sections about the 2002 Gujarat carnage, the Babri Masjid demolition, dropping passages that dealt with the emergency, and removing chapters on protests and social movements. Now, some of these changes had been disclosed back in April, but the extent of these revisions have only come to light now. In this segment, we speak to Indian Express's Ritika Chopra about these changes, specifically to the political science textbooks. Ritika, one of the biggest changes that we knew were going to be made were those related to the Babri Masjid in the Class 12 political science textbook. Tell us what these changes have actually been.
So our latest story actually is a follow-up of what has been reported in April. It's just that now we have a complete picture of the extent of revisions made to the content on the Ayodhya dispute in the Class 12 political science textbook. So basically the most significant portion of that chapter on the Babri Masjid demolition has been extensively pruned. So for starters, it's down from 4 pages to 2 pages. And the biggest cut, as we have pointed out in our latest story, is that entire sequence of events in the run-up to the actual demolition that happened, that sequence has been sort of, which actually was about 2 pages, it's been now reduced to about a para. Now, what that actually means is that when you cut out so much, they have actually left out BJP's Rath Yatra. They have left out the car seva that happened. They've left out, interestingly, it mentions demolition now in one sentence, but what's more interesting is now nowhere in this chapter now is Babri Masjid referred to it by its name. So now it's called a 3-domed structure. That's it. Not even a masjid or a mosque. It's just a 3-domed structure was demolished. And they've even deleted events in the aftermath of the demolition, which is the communal violence that took place, the dismissal of the BJP government in the state, the imposition of the president's rule in the state.
Right, and they've also removed BJP expressing regret over what happened in Ayodhya.
So all of this is gone. So now you essentially what you have is that you're introduced to the Ayodhya issue, but you aren't really told about the events or what eventually led to the demolition of the mosque. And primacy here is now given to the Ram Janmabhoomi movement and the Supreme Court judgment, following which now Ram Temple has been built at that site. So that's basically what has changed.
Yeah, and the older textbooks also had images of newspaper articles, and they have been removed as well.
This I must point out that, this trend of dropping newspaper clippings from political science textbooks, particularly the NCERT, actually hasn't been started by the incumbent government. This started before the NDA also took over, but it all started with the UPA government dropping political cartoons. A lot of these cartoons were sourced from newspapers. But that I think kind of started this trend where eventually now when you look at most NCERT, especially the political science textbooks, they don't have any. They've more or less gotten rid of almost all the newspaper clippings. So in this chapter in particular, there were a lot of newspaper clippings on the reportage that happened in wake of the demolition. For instance, there's a clipping, if I'm not wrong, there's a Hindustan Times clipping from the day after where the headline reads that, Babri demolished and Kalyan government sacked. That's gone. There was another news clipping. The headline read, essentially attributing a quote to Vajpayee saying that, what happened in Ayodhya was a mistake or something to the effect.
Yeah, it said Ayodhya, BJP's worst miscalculation.
Right. So all of that is also gone. Yeah, and they've added, like I mentioned, 2 paragraphs about what the Supreme Court judgment was, and it's been described as sort of a celebration of democracy and consensus.
And Ritika, after these changes came to light, we also saw the NCERT director, D.P. Saklani, justifying these changes. Can you tell us what he said?
So D.P. Saklani, I mean, look, there's no hiding. They have made this public. It's part of the textbook. When, of course, asked why such extensive changes to one section in particular dealing with Ayodhya, to that, I mean, he's always taken the cover of experts. We are always told that any change made in an NCERT textbook is based on the opinion of expert, and that NCERT, in a way, is just providing administrative assistance, and that there is no interference. And these are subject experts who recommend these changes, and most of the time they are accepted. We did also ask him this question that, if the subject experts recommend that, all the sequence of events leading up to the demolition, should that be dropped, or should Babri Masjid not be even identified by its name? He, again, the answer was evasive, but said that, look, everything is based on the feedback of experts. When asked sort of as an aside, which didn't, have anything to do directly with the latest story, but yes, of course, like I mentioned that, mention about the communal violence that followed, that was dropped. And in the past, many references to the Gujarat riots have been changed, or rather just deleted. To that, he said that, the experts have felt that, we've had many riots, communal riots in our country's history. But it seems as if some riots are being selectively taught to the students. So which is why references to those selectively mentioned riots have been dropped.
Yeah, and he also told PTI that, why should we be teaching about riots in school textbooks? We want to create positive citizens and not violent and depressed individuals. But the other change we have seen this time is one in the Class 11 political science textbook and what it says about vote bank politics. Basically, this time a particular criticism has been introduced.
Yeah, so essentially the new content basically states that vote bank politics is associated with minority appeasement, and that parties which indulge in vote bank politics are essentially disregarding principles of equality, and they tend to prioritize interests of a minority group over others. So just quickly to tell you that this was a very small section in that chapter which talks about vote bank politics. And this is actually a feature of the NCERT textbooks that was introduced, or rather have been introduced in 2006, was that there are these little boxes where two characters ask kids questions. They want them to engage with difficult questions. And this was one question that they had asked about vote bank politics. And now I'm talking about the old version of the book. And the question was that, what if welfare of the group in question is sought at the cost of welfare and rights of other groups? That's one question. And what if the interests of the majority are undermined by these secular politicians? Then a new injustice is born. So this question, in a way, asks students to think hard that yes, there is criticism of vote bank politics. And do you think that this is a form of injustice where the interest of one group is prioritized over others? So what's interesting is that it wants students to engage in critical thinking. The content currently, so this question has been retained, except the answer is now different, where the old version essentially tells students that if someone's asking you that question, can you think of examples where vote bank politics could have led to the entire system being skewed in favor of one group? If you can think of examples, one group here, of course, being the minorities, and they urge students to think hard. And then, of course, it does say that if you think hard, you will see that there is little evidence that this has happened in India. And that, in short, there is nothing wrong with vote bank politics as such, but only with the form of vote bank politics that generates injustice. So while it says that something like this may not have happened in India, it does acknowledge that the form of vote bank politics which leads to injustice, of course, there's something wrong with that.
Right, so this was the older version. Tell us the part that has been added now. What does the new version say?
So now the latest version, or the revised version of the textbook, of course, talks about students and asks them to think of examples of how vote bank politics could have led to injustice. But it now adds that, and I'm now sort of reading this out, that here the important feature is that the whole group works as a single monolithic unit during voting. Despite the diversity within the unit, here of course a reference to the minority group, the party or the leader pursuing such vote bank politics tries to artificially construct a belief that the interest of the group is one. in effect, by doing this, the political parties priorities short-term electoral gains over long-term development and governance needs of society. So this pretty much is saying that a political party, in order to appeal to a particular section, can, in order to achieve its short-term electoral gains, can, sacrifice long-term development and governance needs of the society. So this makes the criticism almost a statement of fact and doesn't leave much room for debate. I mean, one can obviously argue that the older version also says that maybe there aren't enough such examples. But then still that is, let's say, a more nuanced response to that question. And now here, it kind of makes it seem like vote bank politics always runs the risk of the majority suffering because a minority group's interests are being prioritized over others.
And next we talk about the charges against Dr. Sheikh Showkat Hussain, the former professor at the Central University of Kashmir, and Arundhati Roy, the writer and activist who has been one of the most prominent critics of the Modi government. Earlier this week, the Delhi Lieutenant Governor sanctioned the prosecution of Roy and Dr. Hussain under the stringent anti-terror law UAPA in connection with the 2010 FIR. This FIR was filed over the alleged provocative speeches they had given in public. In this segment, Indian Express's Apurva Vishwanath tells us about the matter. Apurva, so begin by telling us what was the reason that an FIR was first registered against Arundhati Roy and Dr. Sheikh Hussain.
So, Shashank, this is about the 2010 speech that Roy and others had delivered in Delhi. Of course, in the original FIR, apart from Arundhati Roy and Showkat Hussain, there was also two others who had been named as accused, who are now dead and they cannot be prosecuted against. But in the initial FIR, this was a case of, say, hate speech, sedition, and essentially that it was a anti-India speech.
Right, and this was 14 years ago, but could you tell us what happened after that? Was any action taken against both of them?
So after the initial filing of the FIR, there hasn't been much movement in the case. Of course, the Delhi police at some point would have written to the LG seeking a nod to initiate prosecution. But before that, there has to be some sort of primary investigation that the police has to do. Usually the police goes with a draft charge sheet to the LG and the LG then gives sanction. This sanction is one of our checks and balances we have in the Code of Criminal Procedure. That for certain crimes, the police on its own cannot start, they can investigate, they can register a case, but they cannot start trial because this is like the filter to weed out frivolous cases from genuinely troubling cases. So the LG would then have to apply her mind and give sanction in this case.
Right, so the Delhi police approaches the Delhi LG. We don't know exactly when, but tell us what happens next in the case.
So, sometime last year, Delhi's LG Vinay Kumar Saxena first gave a sanction for certain offences, which is, our IPC crimes. Usually sections 153A, 153B and 505 of the Indian Penal Code. These are the trifecta of sections often invoked to tackle hate speech. Right? These are sections that punish promoting enmity between different groups or making statements prejudicial to national integration. Or the last one, that is section 505, is actually public mischief, making statements conducing public mischief. So these are some of the sections that the LG granted sanction for prosecution in, say, October last year. But the problem here is with that sanction, the police could not have proceeded with the case. The trial could not have begun. So which is why the Delhi police seems to have sought a fresh sanction under new charges. This time, the additional charge of the UAPA has been invoked to get a fresh sanction.
Right. And again, this is happening 14 years later and the statute of limitation is being talked about a lot here. The fact that UAPA is being invoked is also perhaps for this reason. So talk about that aspect a bit.
So, like the sanction for prosecution that is required from the LG, there is another check and balance, which is the limitation under CRPC. So, section 468 of the CRPC essentially says that there is a time bar for taking cognizance of offences. Basically, if you bring in a case after an undue delay, then the judge does not have to take cognizance of that offence. So here it's of course been 14 years and the provision under CRPC says it prescribes different time limits for different kinds of offences. Let's talk about this particular case involving Arundhati Roy. All three offences that had been invoked earlier, which is 153A, 153B and 505, right? These provisions all carry a maximum sentence of up to 3 years. So the limitation for offences which carry a maximum of 3 years jail sentence is 3 years. So basically after 3 years, you cannot bring these cases, which is essentially why the Delhi police seems to have invoked the UAPA. The UAPA is kept out of ordinary criminal law. Like we've discussed with our listeners many times before, that UAPA is an alternate criminal justice framework, right?
Yeah, it has wide powers for the state, and the normal rules of the criminal procedure don't apply to UAPA because essentially these are terror charges.
Absolutely. Because of the seriousness of the offences, a lot of first principles that we know and understand in criminal law are inversed. So, for example, there is a provision that requires sanction, sure, but this limitation does not apply to UAPA offences, right? A terror offence can always be prosecuted even with delays. In fact, the legislation builds in these frameworks accounting for delays. For example, the state gets much more relaxed timelines when it comes to, say, filing of a charge sheet, all those things. So the Delhi police, for that reason, to circumvent the limitation under the CRPC, seems to have invoked UAPA. So now charging Roy with an unlawful activity will allow the Delhi police to bring about a case against her.
And what is the reasoning being given to invoke UAPA? Because earlier she had been charged with hate speech and promoting enmity. So what is the reasoning being given that, we'll invoke terror charges for the same speech?
So far, Delhi police doesn't have a charge sheet that we can understand this from, right? We don't know what are the specific. But if you look at the bare provision itself of UAPA, Section 13, which prescribes the punishment for an unlawful activity, and the definition of what is an unlawful activity itself, right? So there are some words and phrases which are similar to the phrases that we find in the sedition law. Now, sedition is also an IPC crime. It's Section 124 of the Indian Penal Code, which is currently inoperable because the Supreme Court in 2022 stayed the provision, right? So there cannot be any sedition trials right now. So if that had not been the case, if there was no stay against the sedition provision, of course, Roy would have been prosecuted for sedition, which is one of the charges that was in the FIR in 2010 as well. But because sedition is no longer on the table, it's no longer an option on the table, the Delhi police seems to have gone with UAPA. And when you look at the UAPA definition of what is an unlawful activity, right? So the definition includes, the phrase which says disaffection against India. Now, for these statements which involve Kashmir and essentially the Indian Army's role in Kashmir, the argument could be that it causes disaffection against India. The phrase that the sedition law, in fact, uses is excite disaffection towards the government established by law in India. So it's probably that which prompts the Delhi government to invoke UAPA. And of course, apart from that, the larger procedural aspect, to be able to bring a case now, you need a stringent provision. You need a stronger provision. But again, what we don't have answers to is why now and what has changed in the case so far.
And Apurva, we have discussed this in the past as well, that it's nearly impossible to get bail in a UAPA case. So could you talk about what will happen in this case going forward for both Roy and Dr. Sheikh?
Yeah, so of course, first will be the question of admissibility even before the bail provision in UAPA kicks in, right? So the Delhi police will have to do some explaining to a judge as to why this case has been brought about now. And also whether there was any application of mind in granting the sanction. Again, we don't know the reasons for which the LG has given sanction, but that also will have to be tested in a court before the case is admitted. The defense could easily argue that, the 14-year gap in bringing a terror charge makes it susceptible to misuse, right? It may not be a credible case. So that could also just go up to the highest court, right? From trial court to the high court and then to the Supreme Court before the provision actually being used against her. Then the other thing is also about what is the preliminary inquiry that the Delhi police has done in this case. Like we know, 2 accused, of course, now not alive. The remaining 2 accused, that is Roy and Showkat Hussain. So did the Delhi police call them for questioning at some point, which it doesn't seem like they have. So, what were their statements? What did they say? And without any of this preparation, could the Delhi police have approached the LG for a sanction to prosecute? So these are all questions that will first have to be litigated before the UAPA charge sort of finally takes over.
And next we talk about a private medical college that was prohibited from admitting new students earlier this year by the National Medical Commission, the apex medical education regulator in the country. This is the White Medical College in the Pathankot city of Punjab, and it currently has only 2 batches of students who are looking to transfer to another institution entirely. Indian Express's Anonna Dutt has been covering developments at this college and faced harassment from the authorities while reporting on site. She now joins us to share the current state of the college and what she experienced while reporting. Anonna, so what is the reason that the National Medical Commission had asked this college to stop taking in students earlier this year?
So this direction came as a result of a court case that has been ongoing. There are 2 batches of students in this college right now, those who were admitted in 2021 and those who were admitted in 2022. And many of these students have sought the intervention of the court, asking that they be moved to other colleges.
Okay, so wait, what is the reason that there are only 2 batches in the college right now? And what is the reason that even these 2 batches want to be transferred to another college?
So this begins with a history of 13 years. The college was first set up in 2011 and since then, nobody has graduated from this college.
Wait, so nobody has graduated from this college in 13 years? What happened to the students who were studying here earlier?
So in the 13 years, first of all, the college managed to get permission to admit students only for 5 years. And in many of those years, it was through technicalities and, some ongoing court cases elsewhere. And of course, the COVID-19 pandemic. So all of this kind of helped the college to secure these 5 batches of students. And 3 batches of these students were moved out earlier, I think in 2017. And the rest of the 2 batches that are still there in college, many of these students have said that they do not want to continue to study there. And that is essentially because, so the medical colleges come attached with hospitals. And all these hospitals have to maintain a certain number of patients so that the medical students have, learning experience. So this hospital has lack of infrastructure, lack of the number of patients that they need in the OPD, as well as admitted to the hospital beds. And there is also a severe shortage of staff. And this hospital has been repeatedly pulled up by the National Medical Commission and before that, the regulatory body, which was the Medical Council of India. It has also been pulled up by the state. It has been pulled up by the university, and yet it continues to persist. And for the last 2 years, so 2023, the college was not allowed to admit a batch, and they will not be allowed likely in 2024 as well.
Right, and the other thing to remember is that apart from their time, the students who joined this college and then later moved, they don't, of course, get their fees back. But Anonna, is this college alone in that sense? Have other private medical colleges been pulled up by the National Medical Commission?
Yes, a lot of colleges do get pulled up. The problem with ghost faculty is a well-known one in the medical circle.
And by ghost faculty, you mean?
So ghost faculty is when people just allow colleges to use their names without ever actually turning up to colleges. So these people could be practicing outside. They could have their own clinics or nursing homes, but their names are used as faculty members in these colleges. Or they could be working in 2-3 medical colleges and getting paid without actually taking classes everywhere.
And so what is the status of these 2 batches at the moment? How do we see their cases moving forward?
So for the story that we did, we have looked at 2 things. One is, of course, going through all the court records, whatever has been given by the college, the students and the state in the proceedings. And also we've spoken to a few students in the college, and what we hear from them is that sometimes they do not have the faculty members. They are being taught by PhD scholars who've been hired, and that is because they cost much less for the college to hire. So they're taught by teaching assistants or sometimes the professor would show up every once in a while and take one lecture. Things like that have been happening in the college.
And Anonna, you actually faced harassment while reporting on this story. Could you talk about that a bit?
Well, I have been reporting on medicine for 9 years, and I've been to several medical colleges, and I have never faced what I faced in this medical college, actually. So after going there, I actually tried to see the entire medical college first. I stayed in the OPD for a while. I looked at the wards. There were several locked wards. There was a, physiology department which had cement and, construction material lying outside it. There were labs which weren't air conditioned. There were hardly any equipment. They were locked during the hours which should be a peak for a hospital. And when I went to seek a comment from the person who runs the college, they had already been tracking me on the CCTV camera. First of all, they said you shouldn't bring the phone in. In fact, his door said guns and phones are not allowed. And after that, once I entered, this person started shouting at me, and they had some security, so some police personnel were on deputation with him. They asked the police person to go through my bag and take out my phone, which again, I was kind of taken aback because usually they would have a woman police officer do that, which wasn't the case. They took my phone and they actually asked their IT team to format it. So all the photographs that I'd taken till then were deleted, not only from my phone, from my Google Drive. And of course, there was data missing from my phone because of how it was done.
And this was done at the college with these people surrounding you?
Yes, there were several people in the room that I was sitting, including a police officer outside and some people from the IT team.
And as someone who has been reporting on this story, and there's a lot to unpack in what you just said, but even otherwise, tell us about the concerns this raises.
So, of course, again, something that is well known amongst the medical community is that a lot of these privately owned medical colleges are run by people with connections to political parties. And in this case, the owner was very publicly affiliated to one of the political parties. And the challenge there is that it was not just me that it was happening to. There was a lot of bullying that was being done with the students, as the students have told me, that, we won't give you the admit card for the exams, or we'll not give you good marks. That kind of bullying was happening with students. The parents who were protesting, a case was registered against them as well by the college. So these are all sort of bullying tactics that were being used.
You were listening to Three Things by the Indian Express. Today's show was written and produced by me, Shashank Bhargava, and was edited and mixed by Suresh Pawar. If you like the show, then do subscribe to us wherever you get your podcasts. You can also recommend the show to someone you think will like it, share it with a friend or someone in your family. It's the best way for people to get to know about us. You can tweet us at Express Podcasts and write to us at podcasts@indianexpress.com.